So I'm going to do share screen right now, so you'll be able to see what's on my screen for most of this. So you'll be looking at my notes and then some websites that I have ready to go. Can you all still hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So here's the situation as I see it. You have hard scientific evidence compiled by epidemiologists, historians of pandemics and data analysts and various other experts whose goal, in my estimation, this is true statewide, nationwide, and globally, is truth-telling and public safety. Then you have plans for reopening that are put out by our governments that are sometimes truth-telling, depending on what state you're in, are sometimes about public safety, especially were about public safety early on, but also there are various economic incentives, and they're also under political pressure. And so there have been moments when the local governments were more or less in sync with what the scientists and analysts were saying about the situation on the ground. Also, corporations have made drastic moves to protect their brand. I don't think that very many people took this as seriously until that day where the NBA postponed their season, the National Hockey League canceled, no Stanley Cup, and then Disney shuttered. And so if you think it's political, right, these large corporations and leagues have really no incentive except to make lots of money based off of their brand. And if they are reticent to open quickly or be open at all, then you better believe that they have their financial interest in mind, which means they're willing to eat billions of dollars in loss in the meantime to save for the long haul. But then you have governments who are under pressure with economic interests and political interests to move towards this slow rollout. And each state has its plan. And in some instances, it's been a measured rollout that can be reconciled with science and data. So, for example, eating outside is a fairly low risk thing to do, but there's still a slight risk, more of a risk than if you didn't go out to eat. But you can at least show based off of data and how the disease spreads why this might not be a crazy idea. Of course, going on walks and nature trails, but even retail, some risk, but there are ways of doing it safer. Notice I didn't say perfectly safe. But as it relates to church, the permissions given us make little to no sense given the current circumstance, especially in big cities. For instance, churches can now meet at 50% capacity, regardless of size. But for everyone else, only meetings up to 100. So a church that seats 500 in the sanctuary can meet at up to 250 people, which is 150 more than what is recommended for other large gatherings. And as of June 14th, this will change to 250, and then July 4th, wide open. I think that the clearest indicator that the science and our plan to reopen churches can be seen fairly clearly by way of our 4th of July goal. We were told that day we're pulling out all the stops, fairs, fireworks, sports. But then the NBA says, no, we're going to have enclosed games in late July, 22 teams invited, no crowds, all personnel socially isolated, meaning they won't have contact with their families. They'll be all and tested around the clock. The Major League Baseball, MLB, several proposals, no agreement. Soccer globally has had several starts and stops and has served as a case study in real time of the obstacles to reopening, say, sports. For example, how do you convince players, coaches, medical personnel, media that films it all to recuse themselves from their family for months on end so that they can meet in a very measured way for sporting events so that we can have a televised spectacle? The NBA is trying to do it. But again, this flies in the face of what we're being told about reopening in other areas. So here in Indiana, you have July 4th, we're coming back, but then the state fair gets canceled. Well, what is it the state of fair people are looking at, and why are they willing to eat revenue that our governments aren't looking at? Not to mention all the other fall festivals. And nowhere do I see the disconnect between plans to reopen in Indiana and the reality on the ground more than the cancellation of this year's fireworks. Remember, according to the plan, this is supposed to be the day when all breaks loose and we're all free to return to life as usual. At least it's how it's described. And yet the people who put on the fireworks are like, pump on the brakes. 4th of July is canceled. So you have this mixed messaging. So where the disconnect? Well, I think it really is a competition between the economy versus science, but also a political component to this perceived threat on religious freedom versus best practices. So I'd like to walk you through the situation on the ground as I now see it. And this is what I base my decision making on, to the degree that I have the authority to make these calls. Of course, these are decisions that we should be making also together. So the data on Indiana, and I'm sending all of these links to you, by the way. I have a scheduled email, so you can look at these things for yourself. One of the most useful websites that I have found is called COVID-19-projections.com. It is, you can read about its methodology. It's very complex, taking into account human behavior based off of GPS tracking, but also the policies of each individual given state, based also readjusting for current trends. And so it has been shown to be the most accurate projector of what's coming next, by and large. And they have a whole page to demonstrate why that is true too. So basically, if you look at the United States, broadly speaking, we've sort of flatlined. With the curves come down, and then the deaths per day go forward, have us at 183,000 projected by September 1st, which is basically, if things continue on as they now are, that's where it sets us up at. But you can go down specifically to Indiana, and you can click on our state, and this changes every day and updated every day. And as of now, we have projected 4,786 deaths by September 1st. This has gone down considerably based off of social distancing and our compliance with mask wearing, and the fact that once things started reopen, people didn't just rush out. But it also demonstrates that we have flatlined in terms of death, which means it is still all around us, and even worse than when we first started not meeting together. But then what really catches your attention is the reproduction number. This little sort of wavy, now becoming more or less flat line, shows the rate at which the virus is spreading. And you want that to be under 1. When it's under 1, it means that the rate of spread is decreasing. Since we have opened up, you see a slight uptick, and now we're at about 1.1, which means that it is actually spreading, although it's a slow burn. So all of this to say, for the feelings that we get that maybe if the air is clearing because we're opening up, not the case. Simply not the case. But second, this was shared by Rick Spleth, our general minister and president. The website is called mlive.com, and I have the exact link in the email that's going to go out to you at 4 o'clock. And this is a synopsis of a study done by 4 Michigan doctors. Their names are on your screen right now. They don't stand out to me because I don't, it's not my area of expertise, but they each are credentialed from different research think tanks or work at different medical facilities. And they put out a list of with a score of 1 to 10, most riskiest places to be versus least riskiest places to be. And their methodology is much more complex than this article would suggest, but overall, it basically goes under these 5 factors when considering how risky an activity might be, whether it's inside or outside, what the proximity to others might be, the amount of time that you spend there, and the likelihood of compliance to protocol, wearing face masks, gloves, and then the level of personal risk. And You can go over this later at your leisure. Bars are the worst. Level 9. Bars are the riskiest place that you can be, especially after a couple of drinks. People let their guard down. One person even says they'd probably give it a 10. Of course, you've got large music concerts, sports stadiums, which again is why that the NBA isn't rolling back and why the MLB is shuffling and why I frankly think there will be no NFL this coming fall. Gyms are opening up, but they're risk level 8, which makes you scratch your head. Churches, risk level 8. And become risk level 9, you read later in the article, if they're singing. And this is because you have people in one space for usually about an hour, and the air in a room with no windows circulates, or even with windows over time circulates. And if somebody has COVID-19, or a few people do, and somebody coughs or sneezes into the air, it has been several studies done through contact tracing to find out, we know somebody had it at this restaurant, and we know that several other people caught it on that day at this restaurant. How did it spread? And they've even gotten the specific of as how it moves around the room based off of its circulation, ventilation system, right? Why one table was untouched while other tables came into it. So as I think about our sanctuary, in the summertime, probably the safest place to be is the balcony, because very little air moves up there based off of the way cold air travels. We all know that it gets very hot. In the wintertime, probably that's where all the air ends up. So probably one of the worst places you can be, but there's no telling how it moves from front to back based off of the way that the air circulates. And then lastly, I know I'm going at length, what about other churches, right? You may say, is this just where I'm coming from, or what are the other churches? Well, I talked to Rick Spluth and Karen Reed as it relates to disciples churches today. And Rick said that some are reopening in rural areas, and this has him feeling uneasy. They are unaware of any disciples church that is reopened for in-sanctuary worship in the Indy metro area, and they encourage all churches to hold back for as long as possible, is the way that Rick said it to people when they ask. There is one church that is a reasonable and tiered plan, and that's Downey Avenue. And so I'd like to show you what reopening looks like for them. And I think that it would be reasonable for us to adopt something fairly similar. And they've got this nice graphics team. So this looks very pretty. And I like it. But this is their path towards worship at Downey. You see step 1, safer from home, online worship with a possible drive-in outdoor worship, which they have done one so far 2 weeks ago and have not done since, but probably will do again. Church building closed during the week. Food pantry remains open as an essential service. Virtual meetings and programming, enhanced cleaning and safety procedures. And Pastor Reverend Flowers says they will remain at this step for the foreseeable future. They don't have a date for moving on to step 2. So step 2, limited capacity for sanctuary worship, up to 30 to 40 people. No contact worship with modified procedures. Meeting and programs remain virtual only for everyone else. No Sunday school, no fellowship time, mask required. Funerals, less than 25 people. And I might also add that there's no singing. Singing is in choral settings or church settings is basically something you can't do very safely in these times. I could go on to step 3 and then on to step 4, but you see how it might go. And of course, I sent you a link to this as well, so you can see what Downey is doing and how they're approaching it. All this to say, when people ask when, my answer is always frustrating because there's no clear timetable for when it will be safe for people who travel to and from Rob and Run, to and from houses where they care for people who are part of the vulnerable population, when it will be safe to come back. I don't know. And I wouldn't want to give a date on the calendar to push forward only to be disappointed or to create anxiety as it comes closer. I also realize that the way that we're doing worship through Zoom is basically unacceptable in the big picture for some, and not for all, which is why we'll continue when we do get back in the sanctuary, but it is certainly not satisfactory to many. And I've had long phone conversations with people who I can't disagree with. I can't make them like what's happening. But
are the people that are not coming to the Zoom church service, are they watching the other formats that you've sent out for them?
yes. Oh, yes. So like BK Story sends me an email every week. So grateful. Sharon Watson, same thing. Lester Palmer's, that's the way he prefers to do it. Although he thinks he can handle the Zoom call, he would rather watch it. And so he's told me every week he watches the Zoom recording. And there are people who have told me from the onset that they just really don't have a desire. They don't blame me for it, but they just don't have a desire to try to figure out the technology. And then there are some who actually continue to participate who also don't find it very appealing, but I think they're trying to be supportive. And then there are some that find no issue with it, understand it for what it is. So it's not ideal or perfect, and I'm certain if I am shopping around for maybe a better platform, but also understand that if we do relaunch in another platform, it's going to have to be that same learning curve, catching people up to the technology, probably a little easier because we've gone through this dance before, but
well, I think you're absolutely right. We are in a total unknown. There's nothing to base anything on other than, like you said, the mixed message we get from science and from business and politics and whatever. So I think you've laid it out for us very reasonably in what you've just showed us and what you've just said. I don't like being at home all the time, but I'm not horrible with it because I know it's important. I know that we don't know what we're walking into when we walk outside our door. We don't know where other people have been. We may go someplace that we think is perfectly safe with somebody who has been someplace that wasn't perfectly safe. So I think you're absolutely right. You can't predict this.
You're muted, Martha.
I'm really impressed with your research. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not my preference, but as Connie said, it's reality. And I'll just make a couple of observations. We have some other friends of my generation and then Ned's, and we've managed wonderful gatherings on Zoom, but it took personal coaching sessions ahead of time with a cell phone and the iPad or whatever, so you have more ways than one to communicate. And part of me, for those who could be intrigued to come along for the ride, I think it's a service to them. And they love it. I mean, my Girl Scout troop from childhood is just thrilled with this thing. And a lot of people have grandchildren and others who've brought them along. But that may be just a certain strand of folks. And not everybody has the technology. If your iPad is too old, apparently it's not going to work as well. But I think it's a part of moving into the 2020s to help bring at least those who are in a position to take that step would find it beneficial in other areas of their lives. On the other hand, if there are younger folks who are comfortable getting together, then I'm very supportive of wherever that interest would take you and them. We are probably, Ned and I are probably not going to get out. Ned is very concerned and has, underlying conditions. And right now, I was thrilled to see IRT is going to offer virtual performances of all of its productions next year. And for right now, that's probably what we'll do. It's not first class audio, but it's doable. So, but that's just one little point of information, but I'm totally supportive of your analysis and serving where we can. I think it's fabulous, Connie, that you and others are, and Heath and others are keeping the food bank open. That is just marvelous. Thank you.
Sort of thing I've been willing to do. I went on a long walk with Jay Osborne outside. Like we walked for probably an hour and a half and talked about different things of interest to him that, you know, he is similar to Dave Van Barani in some respects in terms of his outlook, but he values honesty and integrity. So he can tell us that I really mean what I mean and believe what I believe. So he's willing to walk with us. But I only brought that up to say that, you know, I am willing to, in certain measured circumstances, meet, but in an enclosed building with a system that's circulating air, it's just really, churches, I said, are ranked 8, and that's if they don't sing, it bumps up to a 9.
And then you think about communion.
Yeah,
right.
We would have to go to individualized cup setting in the seats, and people must realize that they would be guided into the sanctuary with a little like walking path to ensure that people going, you know, north or east and west are separated from people going south. You know, we'd have to have it all mapped out. So,
and bring your own communion.
Yeah.
And take it away, you know, so that.
It's similar to when I described to my mom what it would take for us to meet with her and the grandkids. And I needed her to assure me that she would respect our wishes should Abel run at her, waving his arms, wanting a hug. And on those terms, so far, my mom has not been willing to take us up on it because she doesn't want to meet that way. I hope she eventually decides that she's willing to, in a less ideal way, have a campfire in their front yard. But I need her to tell me that, you know, Mom, you just got out of the hospital doing COVID tests. That's what she was doing. And my father is immunocompromised with rheumatic fever, and they're both going to their churches. Their church is open, and they're well. Anyway, I could go on about that, but in a similar way, when you describe to congregants what it would take, how it would actually work, it's similar to the feelings I got when seeing pictures of the way schools are being advised to reopen with plastic partitions that go to the ceiling, where every student is sitting in a little cubicle with an opaque plastic sheet between them and their peers, and this, you know, with lunch at their desks, and parents go, that I don't know if I want my kid psychologically to have to process that. And I feel like church is similar, different but similar, in that when people want to get back, that's not the kind of way they want to be back. Yeah. The fear I have is what happens over the course of the months as our congregants are aging. And I've begun to realize that some of my last interactions with some of them might have already happened.
Yeah.
But I feel like, as far as my influence goes, and of course in a congregational church, I could get, you know how it works. But this is, you understand now where I'm coming from, and I appreciate your support in terms of your. It makes me feel less alone in it when people understand.
You're not alone, and I'm glad you shared. It's a rotten time that none of us would have chosen, just period. But if we believe in science and numbers, and we have a certain amount of health information, it's not all knowing, but we know a lot about underlying conditions and vulnerabilities, and we know there are a lot of known unknowns. It seems like a time to trust the science we have and use good decision-making skills, and maybe some of us, this is not the same as you having the ministerial connections, but maybe some of us, if you need it or would like it, need to volunteer, which Denise is probably already doing, but make telephone calls ourselves. We used to take communion on Sundays to shut-ins. We're all shut in, but we're communicating. We have tools to communicate. So we could maybe do a more vibrant job of that. What are the circles doing? Do they continue to be active virtually?
They've not been meeting. I mean, we just canceled them for the spring, and so I don't know if there's a plan for fall, really.
Would that be something to encourage?
Well, to like meet on Zoom, you mean?
Or just have a network, like a calling tree, play high school gossip or something. Each one call one.
For the
It's actually one of the things.
For the purposes of the recording that I was making, I'm going to go ahead and end that and say that clearly so that when I edit it down later, you all know if you're watching this later, I'm ending the recording. Thank you.
Okay.